For 8 years, I worked diligently day and night, just wanting to give in a happy family. But I didn't expect that our wedding was hastily held because of an unexpected pregnancy. I thought that with marriage and children, and would be able to settle down and stop wandering. However, now I watch her, who should have spent the rest of her life with me, snuggling tightly in the arms of someone else. Although my clenched fist made a clattering sound, the pain in my heart was still as sharp as a knife. Suddenly, I didn't want to endure it anymore. Because of my words, Storm's face turned pale in an instant, as if she had lost all her strength. And she didn't hesitate at all, immediately called the security guard, and hurriedly took Storm to the hospital, and before leaving, she didn't forget to scold me for being heartless and small-minded. It was something that could be easily solved, but I had to make everyone so embarrassed. Neither my father-in-law, mother-in-law, nor my parents could stop him from leaving. So, I became the focus of everyone's anger. The Mick held the microphone awkwardly, and looked at me at a loss. My mother thought I was embarrassing, and she beat me while crying, and asked me to go and get in back. My father snorted coldly, asked me to reflect on myself, and then forcibly pulled my mother away. My mother-in-law looked down on me, and now she relentlessly scolded me for being a poor boy with no future. She beat me, saying that if I wanted to marry into a family like theirs, I had to learn to swallow my anger and not embarrass my wife in front of everyone. For the first time in 8 years, I felt that sincerity might not be exchanged for sincerity. I didn't want to be the son-in-law of this Yue family anymore. They left with the remaining guests and asked me to go back and reflect on myself. I stood alone at the door and watched everyone leave. Behind me was the empty hotel. In front of me was a sudden downpour. After my parents-in-law and others left, my parents drove to me. My mother rolled down the window and saw them. All the grievances in my heart burst out instantly, and I shouted Dad in a hoarse voice. Just as I was about to open the car door, I heard the sound of locking the door. I looked at them in amazement. My mother warned me with a look of disappointment. Now you should listen to your father-in-law and mother-in-law, reflect on yourself, and find a way to coax him back. After all, she is pregnant with your child, and Storm can never get over you. Mom, how can you say that? My mother ignored me, closed the window, and drove away. I looked at the taillights of the car that was getting farther and farther away. The resort located on the seaside was the place where we held our wedding. I wanted to call a taxi, but found that there was no mobile phone signal. An enthusiastic security guard handed me an umbrella, and his sympathetic eyes made me feel a little warm. I thanked him, then held the umbrella and staggered towards the beach. The rain soaked my whole body mercilessly, and I shivered with cold. My heels were rubbed to a bloody mess, and the pain was unbearable. Finally, the phone signal was restored, and I received more than a dozen messages in an instant. They were all sent by Anne. Her words were full of doubts. Although I had explained that I only regarded Storm as a brother, she kept targeting me. I didn't respond to her, and then a strange number sent a video. In the video, Anne held Storm's hand tightly, accompanied him for an examination, and stroked his forehead from time to time, with tears in her eyes, begging him not to get into trouble. Recalling the past, I fainted in the company because of overwork. That time I had a head injury and a terrible stomachache. But she just blamed me coldly, saying that she was not a doctor. What was the point of calling her? I was hospitalized for half a month that time, and she never came to see me once. Later I learned that, when I fell that day, Storm caught a cold, and the doctor told her that it might cause pneumonia, and she was very worried. So invented all her anger and heartache on me. I stopped and laughed at myself. I realized that I woke up too late, which led to such a humiliating situation. Just as I was about to take a taxi, Anne called me. She questioned me angrily, saying that Storm was so scared that his stomach was hurt, and asked me to apologize immediately. I tried to steady the umbrella in my hand, and replied calmly, "I'm still in the hotel." As my voice fell, a flash of lightning suddenly flashed in the sky, accompanied by deafening thunder. And asked quickly, "It's raining heavily outside, didn't they bring you back?" Before she finished speaking, Storm suddenly cried, "Brother, are you angry? It's all my fault. Maybe I shouldn't have come back alive." And immediately comforted him gently. Then she said to me, angrily, "This is your own fault. Why are you feeling wronged? It's only 1 minute. If you had been more generous just now, I wouldn't have abandoned you." The string in my heart suddenly broke, and I interrupted her with a sneer, "Divorce? I won't apologize to Storm, it's never me who's wrong, it's you. Since they can't let go of each other, why didn't come to provoke me? It was obviously she who confessed to me first, and she said she wanted to be with me forever, so I firmly chose her. 8 years, is their love and youth so precious, and mine is worthless? After hanging up the phone, I quickly called a taxi. Sitting in the car, as text message came again, George, you have to admit your mistakes. You are not worthy of me. It's been 8 years. Can you still find a girlfriend? Is there anyone who is willing to give birth to your children like me? I stared at the text message blankly. I thought that after what I experienced today, there would be nothing more sad for me, but it turned out that there was. I opened the car window and let the cold wind blow on my face. My chaotic heart gradually became clear. I asked the driver to turn the car around and went directly to the hospital. As soon as I stepped into the house, I found that the furnishings in the house were still the same. Obviously, and has been with Storm these days. I casually flipped through Storm's circle of friends. He updated a lot of new updates. The proud miss and actually cooked for love, which made everyone envious. I saved these updates one by one and turned off the screen of my mobile phone. After packing my luggage, I went straight to the hotel. After taking a hot bath, my cold body slowly warmed up. I took a few days off, and when my body recovered, I went back to work at the company. During this period, my mother kept calling to ask if I had coaxed Anne. I told her that I would not be with Anne again. She cried so much that I was upset and stopped answering her calls. As soon as I entered the company, everyone looked at me with strange eyes. My colleague Xiao Wang pulled me to my seat, and I realized that the headlines of major websites had exploded. She held my hand tightly with surprise and envy. I didn't expect your wife to be so rich. I thought Storm was her lover, but it turned out to be you, George. I smiled awkwardly and roughly browsed the content of the post. The scene of the wedding that day was photographed online. A bloody case of grievances between wealthy families was written. Because of his weird behavior at the wedding, even her family's business was affected to a certain extent. If it were before, I would definitely be eager to help and solve the scandal, but now that I have decided to divorce, I am too lazy to care. It's time to get off work. And waited for me at the door of the company for the first time. I turned around and wanted to avoid her. But she caught up with me in a few steps and forced me into the car. Are you still angry? Can't you tell which is more important, a wedding or a life? You are old, but you are still getting a divorce and running away from home. Aren't you childish? Okay, haven't you always wanted to go to that seafood restaurant in the south of the city? I'll take you there now. And took out a gift box from the locker and threw it to me. The things inside rolled out. It was a watch. It looked much more expensive than the one on the wedding day. And looked at me with a look of you should be satisfied. Ming Ji is not in good health. Since the ring is already on his hand, I will give it to him. This watch is much more expensive than that ring, so don't worry about it anymore. I played with the watch in my hand, and the price tag of 99,999 was not even removed. It was probably bought temporarily from the mall. In the past, when I was unhappy, she would make cakes for me by hand, patiently accompany me to listen to music, to comfort and enlighten me, and accompany me to watch movies all day to choose the most suitable gift for me. Now she has become like her family, clearly putting a price on my sincerity, and asking me to accept it with gratitude. I put the watch back in the locker and shook my head. It's too expensive, let's leave it to Storm. And I didn't make a fuss. Since you and Storm can't let go of each other, why don't I give up my position to him and find time to get a divorce? Before the wedding, Anne and I had already obtained the marriage certificate. Now we have to separate and go through the divorce procedures. I also heard that, when she and Storm and a group of friends had dinner together, others asked her why she chose an ordinary man like me. She put the peeled orange into Storm's mouth and smiled indifferently. I can't say I like him, but George has been with me for 8 years, and now I'm pregnant with his child, so let's get married. Our marriage is a charity and pity to me from her perspective. But it is full of love and sincerity from my perspective. Now I don't love him anymore, and I don't care about him anymore. I thought she should be happy that I took the initiative to help her and Storm. Unexpectedly, she suddenly got angry, and her eyes turned red, and she slammed the steering wheel with her right hand. George, do you find it interesting to say these things? You have been trying to please my parents like a dog for these years, just to marry me, and now you are asking me to help you. Aren't you ridiculous? It's just that the wedding didn't happen. Can't I just make it up for you next time? Besides, who can I blame for this? I have already agreed to marry you, but I just want to express my love to Brother Ming, but you insist on it. She always said that I deliberately made her pregnant, but it was clearly her who said that she wanted her parents to recognize me and wanted to have a child with me. But after Storm came back, she regretted it and blamed everything on me. The horn was honked by her daughter. She was so angry before, I would have cried and apologized to her. But now I don't want to argue at all. I turned my head to look at the scenery outside the car. After a long time, as if she didn't wait for my humble request, she turned her head to look at me and called out, "George." I closed my eyes and didn't respond. The navigation system kept reporting the road conditions. When there was 0.2 kilometers left to the destination, her phone suddenly rang. On the phone, Storm said that his stomach was starting to feel uncomfortable again, and he was wondering if he was going to die. To be honest, I was tired of hearing this, even though he didn't get tired of saying it. Since he returned to China, his stomach has been uncomfortable on every important day. Anyone who is not blind can see that he is pretending, but can't see it. I spoke first. "Just drop me off at the intersection ahead." And looked at me in astonishment. "Are you not angry? Aren't you clamoring to go with me?" I shook my head. I used to dislike her being alone with Storm, so I suggested that I go with her to take care of him. At that time, she jumped up and down and scolded me for being dirty-minded and petty, and asked Storm and I to learn to be more calm. She pursed her lips tightly, and her phone kept vibrating. The car drove to the intersection quickly. I took my bag and was about to get off the car, but she grabbed my wrist and looked at me with complicated eyes. "I'll go and take a look. I'll come back later to take you to dinner. Don't worry, don't be angry." "Well, I'm not angry." I perfunctorily tried to push her away. But she held her tighter. "George, why are you different from before? Why don't you? Not jealous anymore, right? What's there to be jealous about? He treats you as his sister. Isn't it normal for him to find you first when he has something to do? Go quickly." I smiled and pried her hand off and got off the car. Then I took a taxi back to the hotel, ate the hotel's buffet, and fell asleep on the bed. Half asleep and half awake, and called me. She explained to me that Storm couldn't leave someone now, and said that she couldn't take me to dinner, and asked me not to wait for her. I just said, "I've already eaten." She immediately fell silent, then gritted her teeth and asked me, "Do you have to do this?" I said yeah and hung up the phone and continued to sleep. It was not until the next day that I saw her text message warning me not to play with fire and get burned. When I returned to work, I suddenly realized the deep meaning of her words. All the projects I was responsible for have been transferred to Storm's name. He has become our new team leader, always smiling and asking me to do some odd jobs. And comes every noon and takes him to lunch. Whenever her eyes fall on me, her eyes are so cold that they make people tremble. The scandal about the family business on the internet is getting worse. She asked me to accompany her to the family press conference on Friday. Help her clarify that Storm is not the third party. It was me who interfered with their relationship while Storm was abroad, and forced him to marry me. Her words sounded very nice, saying that we were still husband and wife in private, but I had to take some of the blame. This way the family turmoil could be calmed down, and Storm would not be affected. She also said that it was my willfulness at the wedding that caused all this, and I should bear the consequences. Of course I didn't want to accept it, so I blocked her directly. The elders of the family came to me again, and warned me that I had better follow their plan, and not to think that I could do whatever I wanted just because I was pregnant with a family child. I gave them the same treatment as in. Then, I quit my job directly. My ability is not bad, and many companies have wanted to recruit me before, but now when I contact them, everyone avoids talking about it. I understand that this is the family behind the scenes. They want to force me to agree to attend the press conference. But this time, I don't want to give in. After another job search failure, a previous client contacted me and said that their newly developed domestic industrial chain was in need of people, and the treatment would not be worse than that of the family business. But the work location was out of town, and asked me if I was interested. As the only son in the family, considering my parents, I just said I would consider it. Back to the hotel. Dad called and said that Mom's heart disease recurred. I immediately took a taxi home. As soon as I entered the door, I found him there. Mom looked very energetic. I looked at her deeply, and I knew that I was betrayed by my biological parents again. And sat next to me at the table, constantly adding food to my bowl. The three of us looked harmonious, as if they were a family. My mother kept praising, and is such a rare good daughter-in-law, with a good family background, and she is very attentive to George. Although my father was the elder, he was full of flattery and kept picking food for Anne. He greeted me and said that I was too willful at the wedding, and thanked Anne for her tolerance. Their servile appearance made my persistence these days collapse all of a sudden. My eyes were red. I awkwardly held the juice that my mother handed to me. It's okay, after all, we will be husband and wife in the future. Even if George is wrong, I will try my best to be tolerant. It's just a press conference. As eyes were always on me. With contempt and full of confidence. As soon as I exerted force on my hand, the juice overflowed and dripped down the table to the floor. I looked at my parents in disbelief. Am I your biological son? Why don't you stand firmly by my side when we encounter any problems since I was a child? I have already told you that I will not be with Anne again. And frowned, probably wondering why I was so stubborn this time after so many compromises. My mother stopped wiping the table for me, and the rag covered with juice fell on my head. The sticky juice mixed with the gray-brown dirt flowed down my face. She smiled apologetically at Anne. Anne, it's all my fault for not educating George well. You want to divorce me, for such a small matter. Then she slapped me without hesitation and scolded, George, Anne doesn't despise you for being useless, you should be grateful, but you want to divorce me. Do you have any manners at all? It's just a small matter at the wedding, how long are you going to make a fuss? You don't think about yourself, but always think about your children and parents. My face tilted to one side, burning with pain. And didn't seem to expect my mother to do it. She suddenly stood up and reached out to support me. She said with pity, are you okay? I'll take you to the hospital. Then she turned to look at my mother. Aunt, he is my man, and I'm pregnant with his child. If there is a next time, even if you are his mother, I will not be soft-hearted. My mother was stunned. I sneered, my eyes full of disgust. Anne, why are you pretending to be a good person now? Isn't this what you want to see? She was pierced by my eyes. She, who was always high and mighty, actually showed a bewildered expression. George, you... Oh, you really want me to bear the stigma of being a mistress for Storm, right? Well, I'll go to the press conference. Don't regret it. After saying that, I slammed the door heavily. My steps became faster and faster. I just stopped a taxi and left. In the rearview mirror, I saw Anne standing at the gate of the community for a long time. She kept calling me, but I didn't answer any of them. So she sent me a text message, saying that she had to make up for the press conference. She knew that I was wronged, and she would compensate me after the matter was over. Look, she also knew that I was wrong. It's just that when I met Storm, I became the one who was inevitably sacrificed. I directly put her on the blacklist. After returning to the hotel, I lay on the bed with my arms covering my eyes. My parents kept calling me. My mother asked me if I wanted to piss her off to death, and said that she had a heart attack again. If I didn't coax Anne well, she would let herself die in pain. Then she started a long speech, saying that they had raised me so big, but I was so unfilial. I recalled the change in my parents' faces after they learned about his family background. I still can't understand why children love their parents when they are born, but some parents can choose not to love their children. I replied to her, your body is your own. If you really want to die in pain, I won't stop you. Then I stopped replying to my mother's messages. I called the client and said that I was willing to work in another place. At the press conference on Monday, the new baby of the family business made a shining appearance. Businessmen are always thrifty, and they don't miss even such occasions, striving to maximize traffic benefits. I stood at the door of the venue in a gray suit and became the focus. The media reporters swarmed in like bees, invited by the family business. Anne and Storm stood over there, far away. I was squeezed and couldn't move. Anne hurried over. I wanted to break free, but she held me tightly. There are so many people, be careful not to squeeze the child. The flash made me unable to open my eyes, so I stopped struggling. The reporters in the venue were quite well behaved. Storm smiled smugly at me. I smiled casually, thinking to myself, let's see if you can still smile in a while. Mr. George, as soon as Mr. Lee went abroad, you rushed to drug Miss Anne and let her get pregnant with your child. What were you thinking at the time? Where did you learn this trick from? The two reporters stood up, their tone sharp. As face became more and more ugly, and she asked coldly, who asked you to ask these questions? I glanced at her, thinking to myself, pretending as the head of the family, How could she not have expected what I would encounter at the press conference? I ignored her confused and regretful look. I said to the two reporters, "Since you are Storm's friends, I can completely understand your behavior." They looked guilty and muttered, "Don't talk nonsense." But facing my firm gaze, they finally said nothing. After all, if they really wanted to investigate, their identities could not be hidden at all. Not to mention that there were so many cameras present today. Seeing and staying by my side, Storm's body swayed a few times. And stood up quickly, walked to his side, and supported him. "Are you okay? Is your heart uncomfortable again?" As soon as she left, I stood on the stage alone. She felt my gaze, hesitated for a moment, and let go of Storm, but Storm grabbed her arm, and, "My chest is stuffy," and hesitated for a moment, and finally chose to stay by his side. I calmly retracted my gaze. The remaining questions were still harsh, with all kinds of words such as mistress, meddling, money worship, and bed climbing. When everyone had asked almost all the questions, I stood up, picked up the microphone, smiled and opened my briefcase, waved my hand, and threw hundreds of photos of Ma to everyone, saying word by word, "Who is the mistress? I believe you can judge for yourself." Some photos of Ma fell next to Storm. He only took a look and his disguise collapsed instantly. In these photos, Storm was hanging out with different girls in overseas nightclubs. The so-called study abroad and long-distance relationship were all lies. He went abroad to elope with his first love. He was looking for excitement and was unwilling to accept the marriage arranged by his family, so he abandoned Anne. When he was betrayed and deceived, he regretted it and came back to find Anne, but completely destroyed my life. Is this fair? And Anne, she knew everything. These photos were found by me from his computer. But she didn't care, because in her heart, Storm was irreplaceable. She was even willing to cover up the truth for him, and let me take the blame. "George, you." People around them were talking about them. Just like on the wedding day. Storm trembled, and curled up in his arms. And looked at me with a look of disbelief. I enlarged the screenshot of Yaima's chat and displayed it on the big screen. That was the message Storm sent me privately on the eve of the wedding. He asked me to guess whether Anne would choose him or me tomorrow. At that time, I didn't understand his intention. Until Anne gave up on me without hesitation. I continued to scroll the screen. It was the intimate photos of the two of us that I saved, which Anne posted on her moments every time she looked for Storm. Various angles, full of ambiguity. I walked over again, and threw Yaima's stomach examination report on Storm's face. "Even your stomach disease is fake, Storm, your acting is really good." He shook his head with trembling lips. "George, I don't know what you are talking about. I know you don't like me, but how can you forge these to frame me?" What a drama queen. I was too lazy to say more, so I just said, "The truth will be determined by the public." After all, the reporters present were not vegetarians. His body softened and he fell to Anne. What was rare was that Anne did not help him this time, but walked quickly to my side. Cheating, sheltering a mistress, and confusing right and wrong. This time, her reputation was completely ruined. The new product launch was also a failure. The family business will definitely be hit hard. I thought she would settle accounts with me. Unexpectedly, she was holding two photos tightly in her hand. One photo was her, wearing pajamas and hugging Storm. The background of the other photo was a hotel room, where she and Storm kissed with their eyes closed. Her lips trembled and she grabbed my arm. "George, how do you have these photos? This is not what you see." I sneered and shook her hand away. "What's that? Did someone force you to kiss him?" I always thought she could see Storm's circle of friends. Now it seems that she didn't know at all. No wonder she was so confident to tell me that it was just a small matter at the wedding. The scene was in chaos. I nodded with satisfaction, then looked at Anne, showing a cruel smile, deliberately raised my voice, and turned Evrion's eyes to me. "As for me, I put the video surveillance on the big screen. I have never had any intimate behavior with Miss Anne, and her child is not mine. In short, I am her scapegoat." And froze in place, staring at the big screen, too late to react. The reporters present all had a few horses in their hands, the photos I just threw down. They were constantly taking pictures of the surveillance video on the screen. The focus of the interview instantly became Anne and Storm. And I squeezed out of the crowd, and left in style. When I was almost at the door, I could still hear Storm's helpless crying. Anne was surrounded by the crowd and couldn't get away to find me. She shouted my name in pain. Asked me why I did this to her. I just called a car and was about to leave. as parents also arrived, and they angrily asked me what I had done. I smiled brightly. This is just a small gift for you. The news conference caused a stir in the city. My parents kept calling me, asking me if I was crazy, and asked me to cooperate with the family business emergency public relations. I turned a deaf ear to their words. I figured it out. For so many years, as the only child in the family, I gave up countless opportunities to accompany them. I once believed that there were no parents in the world who did not love their children. I thought they loved me in their hearts. But until this moment, I saw the truth. There are really parents in this world who do not love their children. They raised me up, but never gave me the selfless love and care that parents should have. From now on, I only need to fulfill my financial support responsibilities, and then I will be free to chase the wind, the sea, and the mountains. This public relations crisis is not trivial. The stock of the family business has been hitting the limit for several consecutive days. I have no joy or sorrow in my heart, only a sense of relief. The trip abroad was scheduled for half a month later. I signed up for an English-speaking course. I thought and would not come to see me again at this time. But just a week later, I came out of the cram school and saw Anne waiting outside the door. She looked much thinner, and she was wearing a blue scarf that I knitted for her last year. In the past, I would save up half a year's salary to buy her bags and jewelry. But later I found that the gifts that seemed valuable to me were the least valuable in her closet. So last year, I saved up 3 months' salary and spent nearly 3 months learning to knit scarves. I thought this would make her feel my heart. But when I gave it to her, she just glanced at it and stuffed it into the deepest part of her closet. I wanted her to try it on, but she frowned and looked at my almost pricked hand and said, "You care so much. Did you really knit it yourself? George, you wouldn't do such a boring thing, would you?" I immediately hid my hand in my sleeve and said, "Of course not." Seeing me staring at the scarf, she deliberately pulled it up to reveal the butterfly embroidery with her name. "George, does it look good? I thought you had thrown it away a long time ago." I answered indifferently and turned to walk towards the hotel where I was currently staying. She followed me into the narrow hotel, hesitant to say, "Why do you live in such a place? If you are short of money, I can." I interrupted her. "Have you forgotten that I aborted your child, ruined the new product launch of the family business, ruined you, and ruined Storm?" "George, I have thought it through. I was not thoughtful before. This matter is not your fault. As long as you go back with me to apologize to my parents, I promise that my husband will only be you, and we will have children again." I was almost amused by her. How could she still think that I wanted to be her husband? "I think you have missed the point. The problem now is that I don't want you anymore. It is even more impossible for me to go back with you to apologize." She gritted her teeth, her eyes were red, and she wanted to come over to hug me, but was stopped by my cold eyes. "George, you never said such hurtful words to me before. You must be angry with me, right? I can explain." She took out a stack of photos from her arms while speaking. I ignored her and boiled water. She followed me. This photo of the horses kissing was taken when Ming lost the big dare. There were too many people at that time, and we couldn't break the rules. This horse was taken in the hotel that day. There was a sudden power outage. He was scared and jumped on me, so we hugged each other. And this horse. Until the water in the kettle went from boiling to cold. She still had a large part of the photos left in her hand. And her voice became lower and lower, and even her voice began to hoarse. I looked up and asked her, "Do you want to continue?" She held the photo tightly and closed her eyes painfully. When the two families got married, it was actually me who regretted the marriage. Because I fell in love with you, so when he confessed to me, I refused. Because of this, he went abroad in anger and suffered, all that. George, we owed him before, but I promise that I will never let you suffer any grievances in the future. You will understand me, right? Her words surprised me. The first time I met Anne in college was at a club activity. My parents are very frugal. So when I was a freshman, they directly cut off my living expenses. At that time, even if I worked hard, I often went hungry, not to mention buying clothes that cost hundreds of yuan apiece. Just when I was at a loss, she handed me the clothes and said not to affect the entire club because of me. It was from then on that I began to pay attention to her, but Storm was always behind her, so I chose to hide this feeling silently. I didn't expect that she also liked me at that time. I immediately felt a strange feeling in my heart. I felt disgusting. I raised the corner of my mouth slightly and looked at her. "You don't really think that I will be moved to tears after listening to your words?" You think too much. I just feel sick. This is all your own decision. You could have made up to him in countless ways, but you chose to hurt me. We have completely drawn a line between us, and I can't forgive you anymore. I took out the divorce certificate from my bag. Her eyes widened, and she looked unbelievable. On the third day after the press conference, as parents came to me and scolded me for being an unscrupulous bastard. Then they used all means to bring our marriage to an end. She seemed to realize this and leaned against the door weakly. So, you won't come back, right? That's right. I didn't tell anyone the day I left. Just as I was about to get on the plane, Storm suddenly rushed towards me. He yelled, "Go to hell!" He held a shining knife in his hand. He yelled that I had taken it away. He also said that they had separated in and me, so why did she still refuse to accept him? I didn't have time to dodge. At this critical moment, a familiar figure stood in front of me. The knife pierced his abdomen, and the blood immediately stained her white skirt red. Storm was subdued by the airport security, and someone in the crowd called the police. I watched her fall in front of me, but my heart was unusually calm. The boarding broadcast sounded. I held the ticket in my hand, but my other wrist was tightly grasped. She was pale and begged, "George, I know I was wrong, can you stay?" She pulled the wound too hard, and the blood flowed faster and faster. Although I no longer had feelings for her, I didn't want to take her life for it. So I took off the scarf I knitted by myself from her neck, pressed it on her wound, and calmly called the emergency number. Then, I pried open her fingers one by one, and, "I'm really annoyed by you doing this." After saying that, I handed the task of taking care of her to the airport staff, and left without looking back. In the second year of working hard in other places, I still sent money home every month. My parents no longer scolded me for being heartless and leaving them two old people at home like they did in the past. Now they always ask me with expectation and a little pleading if I can go home for the new year this year. The family business collapsed. I heard it was because of Storm's betrayal. He not only publicized the family's scandals on the internet, but also sold the family's business secrets to competitors. In the end, he was pulled by the angry Anne and jumped from the company building. Both of them died. I enjoyed the beautiful scenery of Huangshan with my colleagues. My boss kept talking about those old stories in my ears. I didn't feel anything in my heart. The Spring Festival in China was approaching, and I sent a message to my parents, "I won't go back." Then I was pulled by the colleagues next to me to take pictures. Facing the camera, I showed a long-lost bright smile. I knew that my new life had just begun.